Okay, so this is a Sea King Mark III, built by Westlands. They were mainly built in the 80s really, and replaced the Whirlwind. They were powered by two Gnome gas turbine jet engines, well, this one's from a Whirlwind. And they were upstairs there, above the pilots, the two engines there. The air intake is that sand filter, believe it or not. In the olden days, we just used to have what we called the barn door, which was a deflector. But what they found was during the Gulf War, when the Royal Navy had their Mark IVs out there, that was a great way to stop ice from getting down the engines. So that's that big box on the front. The rotor head, we had the blades on there. It was fully automatically foldable for being on board ship or into tight spaces. 3 hydraulic systems, 2 to power the flying controls and 1 to do things like the hoist and the undercarriage, stuff like that. The Mark III, of course, had the standard as the anti-submarine version with the sponson and the retractable. The Mark IV just had a little stub wing with fixed down undercarriage. Missing now from this one at present, though hopefully that will change soon, the cargo door, which is where the winch was placed, basically just underneath the light. You can see the light on the outside of it, and that's where the radar operator would become the winch operator. And the winch would go down to actually complete the rescue.
So when you're ready.
Okay, so the pilot sat. Captain in a helicopter sits on the right-hand seat, which would be my seat on a call out if I wasn't on with another captain. Co-pilot sat that side. The captain's responsibility was obviously in charge of the aircraft, although that was pretty notional. We were a committee of 4. But he was normally the handling pilot. The joy of having another pilot in the Sea King is if we had to do a rescue against a mountain left side on because of the wind, then the co-pilot could fly it from that side. Co-pilot's main responsibility was navigation and doing the radio. The instruments, we were very lucky. This was a good enough kit on avionics to actually fly airways and go into controlled airspace, which we use from time to time. We have a main attitude indicator, each of us, which have independent gyros with a backup one that runs off DC if the AC should fail. Maximum speed of the Sea King was 125 miles an hour. They do go faster, but I'm not going to incriminate myself. Other instruments, which perhaps peculiar to us or from fast jets, we have a radar altimeter, and I'll talk about that again in a minute. The torque meter, 2 needles, 1 for each engine. We measured in terms of torque as to how much we could pull. And yeah, it wasn't 100%. We were allowed to go to 111 normally. Yeah, there we go. Obviously, upgrades over the years. It would do more. But again, if we did that, we had to own up to it in case we'd done any damage to the aircraft. And every once in a while, people got caught out and they had to use that extra power. It's all part of it. HSI, the compass, if you like, gyro type compass, with all the nav aids that are then superimposed, so we could fly ILSs and get Concorde stuck behind us going into Birmingham. That was the Doppler. That's our hover meter. So whereas a rad-out throws a beam down and counts it coming up, the Doppler sends out 3 beams. And it then measures how those 3 beams have changed in period. So if I was in the hover, those needles would be in the middle. So I could actually hover this aircraft on instruments if I needed to. I could have the rad out holding and I could fly it on the Doppler needle, which does happen. I'll come to that in a minute. Other than that, rate of climb and descent indicator, altimeter, which I think most people, and then the rotor speed as well, which was normally always 100%. We try to get it to 100. Warning panels, caution panels, warning panels and advisory. So if we had anti-icing on, for example, to come up there, this would tell us if we had a problem with a hydraulic system or whatever, which would then back up with the instruments. So we've got 2 of everything, 2 engines, so that's 2 engine speeds, 2 engine temperatures, oil pressures, oil temperatures. That's the transmission pressure and temperature, and then the 2 flying hydraulics, and then the one to power the other things like the winch, etc. If we lost a hydraulic system, we could still fly the aircraft, but it would handle differently because one hydraulic system powered the jacks on the head and one powered the mixing unit behind us there, which were the jacks that then moved the control rods that moved on the head. primaries out, the aircraft became quite unstable, but you could still fly it. If we lost the auxiliaries, then it became really stiff to fly, and again we couldn't have a stabilisation system in. I had one of those very close to my retiring when I was at Lossiemouth that night, on the side of a cliff, of course, that night, and I ended up having to clear the Lossiemouth jets out the way for me to do a running landing, because trying to hover one of those things in the hydraulic system out was really hard. It was just much easier to throw it at the floor and run it on. So it's basically those instruments there. We always had a navigation kit. That was the original one. That was a tactical air navigation system, TANS. It worked off the old Decker system, a World War II hangover, of where you had beacons sending out waves, and where the circles interacted, you could work out where you are. That calculated it for you. It also, you could run it in Doppler if you're out of Decker cover, which was really only Britain. This is the magic box. This is our flight control system. So helicopters are inherently unstable due to their design. So what we have in there is we have a set of gyros, and the stab, the stabilisation system, that one there is the one that takes out all the little wobbles and makes it smooth and easier for us to fly. As ever, we had to train with systems out, and when I was an instructor, it was an instructor's dream, this aircraft, because all the circuit breakers, and there were more down there as well on the other side there, those were the hidden ones that the other pilot couldn't see. So you could fail a system on a student and they wouldn't know. So that time I had the hydraulics failure from Lossiemouth. Of course, the first thing when a system fails and they've got an instructor with them, they say, "Did you do that?" So the rest of the box, though, is for if we're over the sea and we in bad weather, or even at night, we would use it. So what we would do is we would tell it what height we're standing at. So I've been fiddling with this. We normally flew at 200 feet over the sea in bad weather. The radar would keep us away from any obstructions, so it'd be at 200 feet. And we would enter normally at around about 80 or 90 knots, which is a nice sort of entry speed. And then we'd want to end up normally at 50 feet. That was our standard hovering height in a Sea King over the sea. It was higher than the Wessex. The Wessex was 30. And the reason for that was the intensity of the downdraft. Because we were heavier, it was more of a downdraft, and made it more difficult for people underneath. So what we'd do is the radar operator would use his radar. He'd line us up with a target, whether it was somebody in the sea or a ship or whatever, and he'd calculate the wind. He'd give me lefts and rights to line up at the right heading, and then he'd say, engage down. I'd do that one. And when I did that, lights would come on, the radar hold would be engaged, and we would then fly, the aircraft would then fly itself down nice and smoothly to come into the hover on the same heading at the 50 feet. But at that stage, can't see the boat yet, or the person in the water. So what would happen, I would then take the cyclic, the control column, into my command, and I'd be watching the Doppler gauge. So the height's being sorted by the radar altimeter, and I then would nudge the aircraft. I'd move it, so it's a bit like a computer game really, it's mechanical. So I'd move it so it would hit like the circle there, or even if I wanted to go a long way, the second marker. And we would hover taxi in towards the target. And we'd keep going in, he'd give me distances and I'd slow it down as we got closer. Then eventually I'd get it visual and I'd position the aircraft in a suitable place for winching. If I could see the target, if it was a boat, I would take control of it then, and I would fly it hovering whilst the winchman went then into the doorway to do the winch operating, the crewman right up would. If it was a little target in the sea or a very small boat, I wouldn't be able to see it. So what I'd do, I'd press that magic button there, and that energises a little joystick, like a Space Invaders joystick down the back. I'll talk about that in a bit. And he would then nudge the aircraft on that, where he could see where the target is. So it's like this. So he's flying the aircraft with one hand and then operating the winch with the other. So they had to be very coordinated. Then he'd do that. The winchman would come back up with the casualty. They get settled. They said, right, you're clear to go. Go on this heading. So I put the aircraft on the right heading. I'd hit that button, and the aircraft would fly itself up to 200 feet. And then I'll take control back again. However, this was an old system. It was simplex. And if one system failed, it could drive you into the sea. So we always monitored the controls very, very carefully. And again, me being a nasty instructor, when I knew it was coming, I would fail one of the systems to check that the pilot knew to take control himself. they'll tell them, yes, it was me. Otherwise, various bits of radios and odds and ends, like the emergency blowdown for the undercarriage and stuff. Oh, the pedal. Well, I'm assuming everybody knows how a helicopter flies.
Well, think of that, but you can describe.
It's very simple. In forward flight, this acts exactly the same as a normal fixed-wing aircraft. You know, forward, pitch the nose down, pitch the nose up, go left, go right. Simple as that. Our throttle is this, the collective. So if I want to go faster, I pull that up and the computers then calculate how to do it and make sure my rotor speed always stays the same. So it's like a governor, but by controls. In the hover, it's a bit different, slightly. It's still that to go forward, that to go back, that to move left, that to move right. That's your up-down lever. So if I'm getting airborne, I pull that up and the engines detect that I want that. They wind the rotors up, so as the blades change their angle of attack, they don't slow down. And we go up into the hover. That, I'm then using visual references to keep myself in the hover. And the pedals, again, in forward flight, are just like a rudder on an aeroplane to keep you in balance, flying straight. Same in a helicopter. In the hover, though, that's how you can do spot turns and adjust the heading of the aircraft staying in the same spot. So it's all very simple. You just need coordination.
Yeah.
Flying with the F4 and F3 guys up at Lucas, it always used to be the fun to get one of them in the left-hand seat and give them a flight. And if one of them was doing really, really well and annoying me by being good, which most of them were, I'd take the stabilisation system out on them. And if they were doing really, really well, I said, I'm going to get you now, I'd knock out one of the hydraulic systems.
Nasty bugger, aren't you?
Always going to have one up. Up here's the engine controls. These are the speed select levers, so you'd normally start the engines one at a time on there. Cut a long story short, that would be the flight control position there. And then the computers are controlling the engines, maintaining the rotor speed that you wanted. Should a computer fail, we could then select it into manual, whichever engine it was, and then the co-pilot, and in the Seeking Mark IV, the crewman, then becomes the throttle and matches the torques there. And we used to have a walk ride. Torque split, call NR. So if we saw that, whoever was flying would call torque split, call NR, we'd identify which engine was and then pull it in, and then we would continue with the flight or return to base as appropriate.
Wow, that's impressive.
And that is the very quick overview. There's loads more. It'll go on for ages, but yeah.
Is that the oven?
Okay.
Right.
No, we're not an oven. I wish it was. That's with the days of these pizza ovens and stuff. You could. That was just a hot water boiler, and even pot noodles taste nice on a cold winter's day. That was all our medical kit basically in there, and also some flight planning kit. Going down the back, obviously seats for casualties. This was where the radar operator sat in transit on the Mark III, and when I was flying the Mark III, it was a raw radar, no processed at all. The Mark IIIA, and then there was an upgrade to these, got processed radar as well. The old and bolds much preferred the old raw radar because they could see more, particularly when you were doing things that tight in or a very small target. Down here, remember me saying about the flight control system and the Space Invaders joystick? This is it. So I'll open this up, more lighting, shall I? There we go. So that's the auxiliary hover trim. So the aircraft is flying itself now in the hover. I press that button up there, press it there, and you get the little light comes on. And then, like this, the rear crew, the radar op would fly that. And then if over a boat that's moving as well, he's doing that.
Wow.
So that was quite a skill to do that. It was also a bit of fun that we used to play. When we had somebody joyriding with us, particularly my wife on a family's day, that was one, where we were allowed to take them flying once a year. My wife knew about this, but she didn't know the technical side. So they were flying along quite happily, and then the rear crew said, Paul, can you just engage the auxiliary hover trim? Your wife would like a flight. So they said, look, all you need to do, you're now flying the aeroplane. So turn it to the right and you push it that way. And so she did, oh yeah, the aircraft's turning right. And he'd say, turn it left, and the pilot would be turning it in that direction. And she landed on, and she was absolutely beaming. She said, I flew the Sea King. And this was a naughty trick we used to play on people, all in the best possible taste.
Oh, of course, of course.
Here we used to have stretchers. We used to have two stretchers. We used to have a mountain rescue stretcher, and also one for confined spaces, like a modified Neil Robertson stretcher for going down hatches and stuff on board ships, things like that. A whole load more medical kit was stationed on all of the So these comfy chairs here, primarily it was designed for the rear crew on a search, so they could sit in here comfy with their cup of tea, coffee or pot noodles if they were so inclined, and they could look out and have a good look around. It was also very handy if you were going into a confined area. The rear crew could go to that side and check the clearance on the tail rotor for us. And if we picked up walking wounded or mountain rescue team, we could put them in these seats as well, a lot more comfortable than the troop seats there. Yeah.